Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the RPG Daily. I'm your host, Richard Quiner, and this is another episode of the Game Master's Craft. This has been quite an interesting endeavor, creating the show, finding people, tracking people down, getting them scheduled, and getting this thing live as often as I has been quite a feat, in my opinion. But today we have yet another great guest. Today we have Cameron Ackerson from the D&D Coalition. He is all over Instagram sharing homebrew items, homebrew tips, and Dungeon Master tips. And on top of that, he's this guy who's building a community inside a community. The D&D Coalition is all about the D&D creators and finding a home where everyone can work together and just share the love of D&D amongst each other. And we'll get into all that once he's on the stream. But stick around. It's bound to be a pretty interesting show. Cameron, welcome to the show. It's great having you. It's been a little while coming. I had mentioned interviews a while back, but it's now that we have a pandemic, it's easy to get people to find the time because everyone's stuck at home most of the time. Anyways, welcome to the show. Why don't you go ahead and tell people what is it you do, and we'll just start there.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much. That was quite the intro. I'm humbled by that. Thank you. So what's going on, everybody? My name is Cameron. I am the runner of the D&D Coalition. And I just love to reach out and create community and connect with all these incredibly talented people within the D&D space. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Now, Cameron, you said something a little bit before that we started the show that I wanted to jump in on, and it ties into my very first question that I try to remember to ask everyone is, how did you get started in Dungeons & Dragons, and when did you become a Dungeon Master?
Sure. So I started playing D&D when I was somewhere in like 10 or 12 years old. Oddly enough, there was one day where my best friend at the time, we were little kids, and we were cleaning out his grandma's attic. And me being a little klepto at the time, found some cool little D6 dice, blue D6 dice that I actually still have to this day. I've got them right here, actually, because I got my dice tray right next to me. But and I pocketed them. And that evening, it was the weekend, and my stepbrother and sister would spend every other weekend with my stepdad and my mom and our family. And I had these dice at the table, and my stepbrother was walking me through on the back of a placemat at this restaurant, that we could draw on and stuff like that. And my stepdad looks over and he's like, "What are you guys doing?" And I looked at him. We're rolling these dice, and I looked at my dad. And I was like, "Cody's teaching me how to play D&D." And he just kind of like laughs, and then we go back to eating. And then that night when we get home, like Cody and I'm just like infatuated with this. Like, I'm rolling up a character. We're just having fun with it. I mean, we're kids, so we didn't really have anything by the means. I think he had like a 3.5 edition player's handbook that he brought over to the house. Mm-hmm. And my dad walks in and he's like, "Hey guys, come here, I want to show you something." And we walk out to the dining room, and my dad just has this like plethora of old D&D content, like thrown all over the dining room table. And like Cody and I walk out like, "You know what D&D is?" And then we just lost our minds. And so it was just D&D from there on out. Every other weekend, we'd spend the whole weekend. I mean, literally like 12-hour sessions sitting on the living room floor with my stepdad, my stepbrother, and my little brother, and my sister. And it was love at first roll, I guess.
That sounds amazing, and I'm sure your stepdad probably enjoyed that too, because stepdads always struggle to, interact with their stepchildren, but you just handed them something on a platter.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
And I use stepdad very loosely.
Okay.
Him and my mom been together for a very long time, mm-hmm. And so he's been like a father to me. And one thing I will always be grateful for is him taking that initial spark of D&D and just creating all of this. So it's incredible.
Yeah, that's amazing. And what decade would you say that was?
That was in the 90s.
Okay.
No. That was maybe it was like late 3.5. So late 90s, early thousands.
Okay. So not terribly long ago.
Mm-mm.
Which that's That's amazing, because that sounds like your dad probably also went through the satanic panic, I would imagine. This
Yeah.
is just speculation about his life and the stuff that he probably went through. To be able to pass that on to you and now look at what you're creating all the time, and you're trying to just keep that going. You showed, was it you? It was somebody, maybe it was Ray. Somebody posted an image on Facebook the other day with the year growth
Yeah.
of D&D, and it was something around 40 million fans, I believe it was. It was some absurdly high number. And that's great to think that you're out there building it, trying to build the community and keep that going, just sharing that and continuing that. So, building on that, when did you start running your own games then?
So I had a little bit of a falling out with D&D for a while, and then I, like many people, I just found Critical Role on the internet and just kind of went down that rabbit hole a few years back. But it was January of 2018, and like stumbled upon Critical Role, and I watched the first. I just kind of popped in the first season, and it instantly reminded me of how much I love the game. And so immediately, I was at the gym, it was like 5 o'clock in the morning, and then I literally that day I was at work and I was just frantically googling places to play D&D, and I found a game shop nearby and went in. They said they do the Adventures League, organized play, and started going to games regularly. I was doing it, 2, 3 times a week, going to these games, and I'd always leave not completely satisfied. There were some DMs that were incredible wordsmiths, and they could really get that imagination cranking. There are other people that had these awesome pieces of terrain, whether it's like with little print-off figurines or actual real minis. But I was never quite 100% satisfied with like the games. And rather than complaining about it, I was like, well, screw it, I'll just DM myself. And one thing turned into the next, and now it's escalated to way too many minis, way too much terrain, and I love it.
That's the common problem. The dungeon master's plight is you just hemorrhage money on all the cool stuff you can get from it and use. That sounds like a common thing. DMC, a spot where they're like, I want to do something differently, and you step in and fill that role. How hard was it for you to find your first set of players and get like a group going?
Yeah, it was actually it was really easy. It was kind of like one of those things where like fate or destiny or whatever you want to call it kind of dipped its toe in and said, hey, we're gonna make this happen. If you wanted what's the saying about, if you leave you deserve it, the universe will serve it. So ironically, I was dating a girl at the time, long time before, like a year before this had happened. She mentioned a guy that would come into her work, always talk about playing D&D. And so I ended up getting in touch with him. We'd go to these Adventures League games together. And then I mentioned him, like, dude, I kind of want a dungeon master. And he's like, yeah. He's like, I actually know a couple of guys. I went to school around here that would be interested in doing it. And then real quick, I asked one of the other guys that we'd kind of see at the game store around. I asked him if he wanted to join in on us. And he had, his brother and one other friend. And so there we were. It was me and 4 other guys. And yeah, it was pretty easy.
Nice. That sounds like a good, smooth transition into being a dungeon master compared to what other people sometimes go through.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That is great. I've got to dig into some more challenging questions now. That was all softball stuff. I want to know, in your perspective, what is the one thing that you struggle with the most as a dungeon master?
I think it's something that a lot of dungeon masters struggle with, and I think it's relinquishing control over the story. At the end of the day, it's a story that you all cultivate together, collaborative storytelling. And I think sometimes as dungeon masters, we can spend so much time prepping and writing and fleshing out these story arcs, that whenever things don't go in a direction that we anticipate them to go, then we have a really hard time relinquishing that control. And a lot of times I would get disappointed because something didn't go the way that I thought it would, or my players wouldn't elicit the response that I was expecting. And also I'm incredibly grateful for those feelings because honestly, that's why I started my Instagram page. That's why I started the D&D Coalition. Is I would make this stuff. I'd spend hours prepping, and I was like, I might feel like my players aren't really appreciating it as much, and so like maybe I can just throw it there on the internet. And I followed a bunch of awesome people like Ray Got DM, Keith Healy Fire and Dice is a good friend of mine, Epic Jim, and so I saw people were doing it and people were receptive to it. And then I started doing it myself. And turns out people like nerds on the internet sharing their weird homebrew stuff.
Yeah, that's true. And you've created some really interesting homebrew stuff out of this. Out of this, wanting to make something and wanting people to appreciate it, that has driven some really creative ideas. And I was looking through your Instagram earlier today, and I saw a couple items. There was one, oh great, I forgot what it was called. It was a dragon blunderbuss. Do you remember this
Oh,
item?
yes. Yes.
And then
Uh,
after that, you created the ammunition for it. How did
yeah.
that come about?
So I gotta take a step back. A lot of what people see on my page, they think it's wonderful, they think it's awesome. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of these ideas are kind of like inspired by other people. So
Mm-hmm.
Dragle, the Ember Lance, that blunderbuss that you saw, was actually a weapon that is a variation of a weapon that Joshua Blake, NPC voices,
Oh. Mm-hmm.
that he had given to one of my characters at a one shot that we did at PAX Unplugged.
Oh, okay.
And there's a lot to it, and like it was kind of like we all get these magic items that were awesome last minute, but the I didn't really get to utilize it to its fullest potential
Mm-hmm.
during the one shot. And so I was just thinking to myself, like, this item's way too awesome to not, have it relive again if I don't get the chance to play the character again. And so I implemented my home game, modified it a little bit, and that's how that came about. And the artist that I actually worked with, Pavel, Rudux Tavern on Instagram, so he did that, and we did the coalition collaboration. And he kind of brought up, he's like, "Dude, what if we did like ammunition for it?" And I'm like, "You mean like different, like I don't know, like cannonballs, or what do you mean?" And he kind of sent me a rough sketch of the first one, which is like I kind of ran with. I was like, yeah, maybe could have like dragon scales on it, and he kind of like conceptualized something real quick, and then we just went down the rabbit hole. And so we'd kind of conceptualize them together, and then based off what he would kind of create, I would come up with some stat blocks for it. And yeah, it was super fun project.
That's so cool. That I was looking at that and I'm like, that's interesting. So I'm stealing those.
Do
Gonna
it.
put those in my game because I actually just gave my players a gun, a quote gun,
Hmm.
just recently. They haven't figured out what it is or how it works yet, but I was like, I like the idea of the dragon scale ammunition, so stealing that. Um,
Yeah.
Building onto that, though, that is a very collaborative effort, and the whole coalition has kind of turned into this collaborative team effort of creating content, making, sharing the love of D&D amongst everybody in who's there. And you have your website, the thedndcoalition.com.
Hmm.
Yes, it's .com. Um, where people can go find that stuff. Like I saw you have the marketplaces up and running, and you can see all the dungeon masters there. That all ties in to the collaborative nature of D&D, which we briefly mentioned. So I want to know, um, how do you get your players most invested into this collaborative storytelling method, like the nature of D&D? How do you get people in it?
Yeah. I think that's something that every DM wants, is they want their players to buy into the story. And with from my experiences, this campaign that I've been running for I think almost 2 years now, ever since I kind of got back into D&D, it we started with a certain number of players, and then the stories kind of evolved. Players, excuse me, have come, players have left. Um, and but everybody wanted like the remaining players wanted to keep that same storyline, so we ran into this situation where we had 20 sessions with one group of players, 20, 40 sessions with one group of players, but then the new ones that tagged on, the most recent 20. And but we want to keep this storyline going. So and it's really easy for, if you are, so say you pop in on a one shot for somebody's home campaign, it's really easy for you as the DM and the other players to kind of like just think it's new hat. Oh, cool, we got an additional player here. But in reality, that player's lost. That player has no idea who Balthazar is and why the heck they just like backstab the paladin.
Yeah.
So for me, getting my players to invest in is making everything relevant to them. Why does this matter? Whether it's a backstory tie-in, because some players don't really care about their backstory. Oh, some players don't have a black backstory at one bit. But rather than taking that offensively as the DM and thinking like, oh, why didn't they want to take the time to write the backstory? Here I'm spending all this time and money doing this. Why aren't they doing that? But look at that as an opportunity to feed them that information along the lines of it goes. Throwing in things like that new player that just stepped into the table, having them recognize somebody or hearing a name and tying it, making it relevant to them. I think everybody wants the story to be about them, and with D&D, you can certainly do that, especially with the amount of hours that we spend at the table.
Yeah, that's true. Everyone can kind of find their time and play in it. Do you have any tricks at the table to make sure everyone gets kind of their own little moments?
Yeah, session 0 is important, and just like communication overall, that's a huge one that I talk about a lot. But just making sure everybody's level of comfortability, because there's that guy that really just likes slashing shit up with his axe, and he's totally content doing that. But I would say, as far as like a trick or a secret, is to partner up. This is just something I've done that has been pretty successful in the past, but have like different players' backstories intertwined, so that if you are having that one-on-one moment with your player, with the rogue, perhaps it also, like, that backstory also involves the paladin, or however you want to cut that up, so that way, even if it is a one-on-one dialogue or interaction, it's relevant to somebody else, or make it not just 2 people, make it 3 people.
Yeah, that is a really good idea, because sometimes players don't quite take that initiative themselves. Is that something you implement like in a session 0? Do you bring that up and say, hey, do this? Or how would you implement something like that in your game?
So I think the best way to implement, session 0 would be a great way to bring that up, a great moment to talk about that. But also just feedback from your players, asking them after a session, what'd you think about that? Or reaching out to them privately, like, hey, what'd you think about that? Do you like this? Does the story arc sound interesting to you? And of course, they might feel obligated to say yes, but just let them know, like, hey, this could be really cool. Do you want to explore this more? And just kind of trust your players and know that they're going to give you that feedback if you ask for it in the appropriate way.
I think that's a great idea. Open communication, getting that going with your players. That's something I struggle with, if I'm honest about it. Like, I have a really hard time going to my players and being like, what is it that what do you like? What are you looking for? What do you think of this kind of story idea? But that's on me. I recognize that. So that's a really good tip that I think for new DMs, that would be a great one to implement, right away. And start communicating.
Yeah. And to build on that, one thing that I was getting really frustrated with my players, that is, like, I would always ask for feedback and like nobody really have any feedback. And Bill, one of my like longest players that was with us for like 60 sessions, for a very long time, he told me, and that he's a good friend of mine, so I took this in the best way possible. He said, if you ask generic questions, you're going to get generic answers. And that really, really hit home to me, because asking people, so what'd you think? There's a lot to think about throughout a 3-4 hour session. So breaking it up to, hey, this NPC, he was really into the political intrigue of the current story plot. Do you guys like that, or do you maybe want to do something a bit more straightforward? That right there, that's a very direct question that, depending on your players' answers, can send you down 2 completely different paths.
Yeah, interesting. I'm just gonna stew on that for a moment. I like that idea. I like because that's true. That is, and the DMs, like, if a player asks something very generic, oftentimes we want them to clarify. If they're like, oh, I want to make an insight check, it's like, well, what are you insight checking? What are you looking for? Be specific. And the same goes for us. That's a kind of a cool. Yeah, I'm stealing that.
Yeah, by all means.
Shifting gears real quick, there is a question that I feel like should be answered earlier rather than later from Say an Underdog in the chat. He said, "You've said Scrag is one of your favorite characters. Would you say turning some PCs you've made into NPCs is a good idea for beginner DMs?"
1000% yes. And the reason being is that if you've played that PC, for whether it's a one shot, whether it's for a long-standing campaign, you're going to be able to role play that NPC so well, and that's going to be kind of like, if that's your intro, to D&D, that's just going to immediately make you comfortable in that situation when the players start asking you, rapid fire questions or questions that you didn't necessarily write down. If you've played that character, for several sessions, then you might know how they would react or how they would respond. So yes, 100%, dude. That's a good question.
Yeah, that is a really good question. I also agree with that, and I did start doing that when I started DMing. That was just something. I have NPCs that were characters that I played, and I don't tell my players that I played them, but I have several, because you also, as a DM, a lot of times you fall into the category of forever DMs. I don't know. I know you play quite a few streams and such. But there are the forever DMs, the ones who just run games and they don't play that often, but you still want to make characters, make them NPCs.
Yeah. Another thing you can do too is, say, you're playing with one of your fellow players is, one of the people that you play with in a campaign with that certain PC is now a player for you as a DM, and you don't necessarily want to know that, this is Scrag, or whatever character it is for you. One thing you can do is kind of reskin them. Instead of making them a Warforged cleric, make them a gnome, something or other, and change up your voice a little bit. And just the description, things like that. And your players honestly will probably never even know.
Yeah, they'll just be like, "Oh, it's another character." Continuing on NPCs, because I like this idea of. It's something I wonder all the time. When you're creating NPCs, what is the most important thing that you create?
So with NPCs, I really like for my players to be able to picture that NPC. So descriptions are big. It doesn't have to be anything too robust, too long. I mean, you don't have to read off like a 34 or like a 30-second to a minute dialogue of what the character looks like. Yeah. One of my prominent NPCs is a albino tiefling with short, white, chalky horns, with long brown hair, and like they immediately know, like if they haven't seen her in a long time, is you could easily describe that, like you see someone sitting at the tavern, but from behind you can see her short, white, chalky horns, and immediately your players are like, "Oh, that's Arcanist Eudora, heck yeah!" So making things that are memorable. And you can do that with visual cues. You can do that with audio cues. Say it's a voice that you use for the NPC. For NPCs, the best way to throw in a voice, if you want to do a quirky voice, is use a voice that you talk to your pets in, because that is a voice that you talk in probably daily, all the time. And so use it because it's something that you're really comfortable with.
Yeah.
And that can be like a quirky, funny voice. So visually, auditorily, if that's the word, or even if you have like a set mini that's represented that character, anytime you bring them up, plop them up on the DM screen or pop them in front of the DM screen, then your players will be like, "Ah, yes, that's who that is."
Yeah, and anyone who says that they don't talk to pets or animals with a different voice is probably lying.
Yes,
everyone does it. So I actually, that's a really good idea. That's great. And that's the reason I asked that question about the NPCs is I figured I would get a different answer, and you did deliver. I had asked Josh the other day the same question about what was more important for him. He went with motivation and kind of what does that character want? And so it's interesting to see what different DMs kind of bring to the table. It's a different perspective, where yours is to make sure that it's easily and immediately recognizable is great. What are your favorite... nope, rewinding that. Not a good question. Do you do homebrew or modules?
Both. I think the easiest way to have a solid campaign that's always going to have more options is to do a module. But throw in your own, not you, Siri, leave me alone. Do a module, read the book, follow those guidelines, have that be the overarching part, and then pepper in your own homebrew content as you see fit, with NPCs, with backstories, whatever. So personally, like I've been running the Storm King's Thunder for the past 70 sessions, and there's still the underlying arc of the giants and the dragon and what have you. But there's been so many side quests, there's so many other opportunities. But using a module really does provide a nice fallback on.
That's a really good idea. Storm King's Thunder, do you have another favorite module that you like to steal from?
So I'm a sucker for, I love giants. Like whenever we were growing up, the campaign that I played for 12 years, my family, we did like Against the Giants. Basically, my dad, he would reskin all of the old AD&D modules for 3.5 because my brother would just read everything, but not the old modules.
Right.
So we did like Against the Giants, we did the Slave Lords, and we like went into the Underdark and all that good stuff. So I've always loved giants, so kind of partial to them. But also we went to the elemental. What the heck is it called? The elemental plane of
Elemental Evil.
Yeah, Elemental Evil, Temple of Elemental Evil.
Yeah.
So Prince of the Apocalypse is, although it's really sandboxy and has some mixed reviews, I just love that dungeon crawl aspect with the 4 different elements, and I really like that one a lot.
Interesting. I've been playing in a game that is loosely based on Princes of the Apocalypse, and we're coming on 4 years, and we're just like, it's a slog. That's my opinion of it. It is a it's rough.
I think every module has that. There's going to be everything that has those kind of elements to it, and there's ways that you can kind of fast forward through the sloggy moments. Like I know the Tyranny of or the Horde of the Dragon Queen. The caravan ride can be a little rough sometimes, a little drawn out. But there's ways around that. You can still make it interesting. And I just look at those areas that you don't like about the module, use those as opportunities to throw in your own homebrew content.
Yeah, extra little random encounters or something like that. Interesting. You're also the first DM who says they enjoy modules and the usefulness of them in that capacity. It's very common to steal things, but it's less common, I think, to use a module and then just add more onto it. So that's interesting. That is a surefire way to keep a solid campaign, because it's you're not coming up with everything on your own.
And one saying that I kind of have at work and with my employees and everything is, don't reinvent the wheel if you don't have to. If there's a concept, or if you've seen something that works, adopt it, make it, use it, make your own, make improvements on it where you see are necessary. But just for the sake of time too, you don't necessarily have to do everything all on your own, start from scratch.
Very good. That is great things to consider. I've always been the one to encourage people to come up with their own stories, but that's a really good point of view on that. And saving time, save some energy, run something. I really like that. We're gonna shift gears to something a little more serious, because you mentioned you're open to talking about this, and I would like to touch on it a little bit. Coming up this next week on May 3rd through the 7th, there's a stream event called Jasper's Game Day that is in support of the American Association of Suicidology. And mental health and Dungeons and Dragons nowadays goes pretty much hand in hand. It's you can't throw a rock without hitting someone who's talking about it in a therapeutic nature. Personally, I agree. What have been your experiences with Dungeons and Dragons as a mental health kind of tool, if any?
To be fully transparent, I think in large part D&D did kind of save my life. My brother, the one who taught me the ropes of D&D, it started this spark. He lost his life to suicide in January of 2017. So, and after that, it sent me on a massive downward spiral to battling with my own bouts of depression and even suicidal thoughts myself. And ironically, it was a year and 3 days after Cody had passed away that I had found Critical Role. And it was kind of at my lowest moment shortly before that. just coming up on the anniversary of such a traumatic event, and getting back into D&D, it brought back that childlike joy, or that essence, that magic in a bottle. um, that feeling made me excited to do something again. It gave me something to look forward to. It allowed me to create, to other avenues. Like, it led me to find therapy in painting and terrain building and writing, and it's led me to you guys, to having this conversation right
Mm-hmm.
here, right now, and I couldn't be more grateful for it. So I'm all for it.
Wow, I did not know that. So thank you for sharing that story.
Of course.
It's never an easy thing to talk about, that sort of thing, but it is always interesting to see the good that can come of something that was so and this might seem a little soapboxy, so maligned,
Yeah.
back in the 80s, when it was considered the most evil thing, and the satanic panic was in full force, and now we can see all the good that does come from playing the game, being the community. Do you think, well, I mean, I firmly believe it's largely the community side of it is the helpful aspect of D&D. Um, what is I wanna find out.
Send it, brother. Send it.
Well, I really just want to know, like, what about D&D? Like, what is your most? Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to word this. What was the one moment when you got back into the game where you were like, everything turned around for you? If there was a moment when like, the feelings you were having may have subsided a little bit, or was it more of a gradual change? Um, because I know from my own experiences, being in that position of suicidal thoughts and being in that deep depression, it's hard to dig yourself out of that,
Yeah.
right? So was there a moment, or did you see it as a gradual process, and D&D is kind of the ladder to climb out of? Or
So it was a really critical point in my life, both personally and professionally. In my work, we basically moved our clinic to a new place. So I had to basically start from scratch, start from zero.
mm-hmm.
Having crippling debt from graduate school, it was just kind of like, all right, sink or swim, here we go. And I was in a failing relationship that we ended up splitting up.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was kind of this, like, you got to be kidding me, not the next thing.
Right.
And so it was a combination of, in a weird way, the job was taking off, and D&D kind of provided that fuel. Because what I've noticed is that, at least in my life, is that whenever you're productive in one aspect, that creates momentum, and that
Mm-hmm.
momentum can carry over in other areas. And that's why a lot of people talk about, like, how exercise is so important, because it creates momentum. And if you exercise, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. And there's a lot of rah rah shish kimbah that goes behind that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some merit to it. If you accomplish one task, then you accomplish the next, and then you
Mm-hmm.
accomplish the next. So D&D was that vessel of accomplishing things that allowed me to then accomplish other things. As far as, like, a moment that kind of helped me flip the switch and develop that autonomy, that of knowing, like, okay, this is for me. It
Mm-hmm.
was the first campaign that I'd started with the four gentlemen, kind of fizzled and burned out pretty quickly. So it wasn't the greatest, but we started up another one, and for this one, I had some of the same players, and then I've had another player that I'd found actually on the forums in D&D Beyond, and we had done our sessions here and whatnot, and we were probably like 5 or 6 sessions in, so comfortable with some players.
Mm-hmm.
This new player was there, but playing weekly, we had a lot of FaceTime and got comfortable with each other very quickly. There's a situation in our game where one of the village had gotten attacked, and there's an NPC who had lost a child that had gotten kidnapped, but he still had one remaining heir, and as an older daughter. And in this in this raid on the village, the daughter actually got taken out. She perished, and it sent this NPC into, and this is really involved. This is a really deep complex storyline.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of emotional ties to this, and this was something I made sure with my players that they're okay with this degree of emotion.
Mm-hmm.
And this NPC, whose son had been kidnapped, taken away, whose daughter has now perished, went into a downward spiral. And actually, I'd said that he basically left his tavern and went off into the woods. And I was kind of going to leave it at that. And
Mm-hmm.
one of my players, the newest member, his name's Joe. He still plays at my table today. Love you, Joe. Um, he said that he was going to go see what, like, look for Ragnar, and he had went out into the forest, and I wasn't expecting this at all. And he was basically at a hut, and
Mm-hmm.
in that moment, I had to think about, okay, what would Ragnar be doing? And I had illustrated that basically, like, Ragnar was going to end his life. And this very uncomfortable moment, I watched this player um, basically intercede as the NPC. Ragnar was trying to close the door, and basically said, like, no, you're not going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And this was me living out my thoughts and feelings of suicide just a year prior.
Mm-hmm.
And this was Joe talking to his character. It was NPC to PC, but in reality, it was Cameron talking to Joe.
Mm-hmm.
And the things that he said were so beautiful, and they were so perfect that not only did it elicit an emotional response at the table and in the game, but also solidified my feelings and basically just gave me this overwhelming comfort and this reminder that everything is okay. And it was one of the most beautiful, cherished moments I've ever had at a table.
Wow. That's, we're going to change the subject because I don't want to say something stupid and sour that moment because that's very interesting and something to think about. Um, Interesting. Changing subject a little bit to a little more lighter note. I did warn you in the email I was going to ask you a specific question that I ask everybody, and it is, what is your one piece of advice for new dungeon masters and them who getting started in the game?
I think it would be just good general advice is instill confidence in others, be uplifting. Uh, One thing that you asked beforehand, but build autonomy within your players. Make your players feel relevant. Make them feel like the heroes, because at the end of the day, they are.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, by building up your players, you're never going to have a void result. You're always going to be satisfied. And so, my biggest advice is don't tell the best story. You don't have to be an exceptional storyteller. You don't have to do voices. You don't have to have expensive minis and terrain. Um, Inspire confidence, inspire creativity within your players. And by doing that, you're going to have, not only you're going to build your players up as people, but you're also going to build them up as characters, as husbands, as wives, as
Mm-hmm.
friends, colleagues. It's going to pour out into every other aspect of their life.
Again, you made that a little deeper than I thought you would do. Having it pour out into other aspects of people's lives. Uh, it's interesting to me, and I think it's is a great kind of thought sentiment to have about it is the kind of the power of Dungeons and Dragons in everyone's lives. Once people open up to it and can find something about it that they can latch onto and really enjoy, it can bring in so much good, so much cathartic kind of moments,
Yeah.
and can really open people's eyes to kind of the possibilities.
It's the greatest role playing game ever.
It really is. It's a very interesting. That's the kind of stuff that, like, I wasn't expecting to go that deep, but it is the kind of stuff that I'm glad to have happened. So thank you for sharing that, your stories, and
Of
talking
course.
about that, because that's a perspective we can't all get. You know, we can't all live the same life. We all have something different. We all have different struggles, different things we go through, but it's really interesting to hear every people's stories. And so that was, I don't know, I can't top that now. So thanks for that. Um,
Hey, thank you for
so
for basically bringing that out. I mean, all I did was tell it. You're the one that dug it up.
Oh, thank you. To wrap up, I want to know, to go ahead and tell the audience, where can they find you online, like all the places?
Yes. So I am absolutely terrible at social media, but if you want to follow, check out Instagram at the D&D Coalition. Twitter, Facebook, we're all over there. YouTube, even. Richard and I are actually working on a awesome video that he put together for me that I'm really excited to share with everybody. But feel free to reach out. By terrible, I mean I'm really bad at responding to things sometimes. But Instagram is by far my most active platform. And then obviously the thedndcoalition.com.
All right. And you also play on some streams, am I correct? You're still doing that?
Oh, yes. Every Monday I play on the Fabled 42 stream. You can find that at twitch.tv/Fabled42. Where I play Scrag, Sandrinium Walhalla, Gustamus I, a Warforged cleric. He's really awesome. I love him.
It's a lot of names.
Yes, he's extra. And then also from time to time, I play on Fridays on Lady Tiefling's stream with a bunch of other awesome people. That is twitch.tv/Lady Tiefling. So definitely check those out.
All right, and those I'll have to add the Fabled 42 and Lady Tiefling link in the description, but those will be linked down below. I was going to mention tomorrow, for those who are watching, come back tomorrow. We have Chris Solo from Fabled 42, the creator of that whole stuff. He's going to be on the show, so we're going to talk about world building and, going to try to dig into his brain on that one, because I know he's created quite a world with Eucador and that. So, Cameron, thank you once again for coming on the show. We'll have to have you back on again, as we go through the rounds and I get all the D&D creators that I can possibly reach on the show. Eventually I'm going to run out, right? And then you have to come back on and get an update. So anyways, viewers, thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already subscribed to the YouTube channel, go to subscribe to Cameron's YouTube channel, the D&D Coalition. He has videos, unboxings. If you want to know about Dwarven Forge, he's got the answers, I think. And the Dwarven Forge YouTube is good too, but I'm a little biased. Thank you guys for watching.
Thanks, guys.